Before the advent of the railways, the fastest way to travel on land was to use a galloping horse. So the impact of the introduction of the railways in the 1800s was so dramatic, it could rightly be compared to that of the internet today. New lines connected people like never before, opening opportunities for commerce, leisure and communication. The growth of the motorcar, however, led to a sharp decline in rail use, and by the end of the 1960s, hundreds of stations had closed and miles of tracks had been ripped up. I'm Stephen Cranford. I've had a fascination with railways all my life, both in Britain and abroad, both full-size and miniature. I'm your presenter and guide for tracing the rails as we discover those lost railways. Together with transport historian Mike Jaimes, we'll be finding out what remains of these lost treasures and discovering how they looked and performed in their heyday. So join me as we trace those rails.
Winding through the heart of Sussex.
This is Shoreham by Sea. We're going to be bringing back to life, with a little bit of imagination, a little lost railway line that's since disappeared, called the Steyning Line or Ada Line. Opened in 1861 by the London and Brighton South Coast Railway, this 20-mile route made its way through picturesque countryside through what is now the South Downs National Park, serving communities like Bramber and Steyning and Henfield. Despite its initial promise, it was never a major route, and it served mainly local agriculture and local passengers. However, in the 1960s, it became victim to the beaching cuts and the line was eventually closed. But what was the real reason the line closed? If you're unsure where Shoreham is, let's take a look on a map. Let's zoom into the south coast of England. We're going to take a look at the coastal town of Shoreham by Sea in West Sussex. It's also where my journey with you will start. Zooming into Shoreham town itself, we find ourselves at the railway station. Here, during episode 1, we delve into what remains at Shoreham Station and how it too has evolved over time. We then head west, following the line as it crosses Buckingham Road to the site of the old signal box. We pass the Baptist Church, which is almost as old as the line itself, and our green line diverges at the Victoria Road Bridge, marking where our story of the Steyning Line truly begins. Once the site of a simple cottage, this junction is now one of the last physical traces of the old railway here in Shoreham. We will explore this area in detail. Next stop is Old Shoreham Road, where the faint remains of a bridge lingers. Struck by change in the 80s, only one pier stands today, soon to be gone itself. Moving past the rope tackle development, our path aligns with the Downslink walking path. This footpath closely follows the course of the old railway line for the rest of its journey. Even as the landscape changes, we'll still be able to show you pieces of the past peeking through. So, to recap, in this episode, we explore the remnants of the railway on its journey through Shoreham by Sea, once called New Shoreham Town. And as we approach the end of the line for episode 1, don't worry, for the tale is far from over. So sit back and enjoy episode 1 of Tracing the Rails as we look at Shoreham by Sea, the junction of the Steyning Line, the missing bridge at the old Shoreham Road, and where the Downslink path begins. Let's start our journey in Shoreham by sea. Shoreham goes back to pre-Roman times, but it was only really around the time of the Norman conquest in the 11th century that it became a far more significant place. The reason why is the river. It became a centre for trade and fishing. Over time, neighbouring towns such as Brighton, Hove and Worthing increased in size, and in 1840, when the railways came, that's when it really became significant. The reason why? Shoreham Port. It became a very significant port for the coast, and even now it remains a very active place. So it went from being a little medieval coastal town into the vibrant community that it is today. By 1910, it had expanded and had taken in many of the surrounding areas, and it became Shoreham District, with Shoreham Town Hall being its headquarters. In the present day, Shoreham maintains its maritime heritage with a lively harbour and a reputation for water sports. It's also known for this, Shoreham Airport, or Brighton City Airport as it's now called. Did you know it's the oldest licensed airfield in the country? Now you might recognise the building if you watch a lot of old dramas. Due to its 1930s Art Deco architecture, it's used regularly as a location for programmes like Poirot and The Crown. But that's enough about Shoreham. The reason we're here is we want to start tracing the rails. Now, like many good things, the first discussions about the Steyning Line took place in a pub. I'm talking about the White Horse Hotel in Steyning, where a group of people got together to have first discussions about creating a new railway. But I'm not going to talk about that here. That is for later episodes. Shoreham Station opened on either May the 11th or May the 12th in 1840. We're not absolutely sure about the precise date, by the London and Brighton Railway. But then, confusingly, on July the 1st, 1906, it was renamed Shoreham Harbour. 3 months after that, on the 1st of October 1906, it was renamed again to Shoreham by Sea, which it's been called ever since. Can you just imagine how confusing it would have been in 1906, where it had 3 names in the space of 4 months? Have a look at this early picture of the station. Notice how featureless the station was and how low the platforms are compared to now. Well, this original building was demolished in 1845 when the Brighton and Chichester Railway opened its own line from Shoreham to Worthing. So it was granted permission in 1859 and the first train ran in 1861, 2 years later. Can you imagine anything being built that quickly today? I don't think so. Now, at first there was rivalry between 2 companies, and our line emerged partially out of competition from that rivalry. The companies involved were the LBR, or London and Brighton Railway, and the LSWR, the London and South Western Railway. In 1844, the LSWR proposed a line running via Horsham to here at Shoreham, in competition with the LBR. But financial difficulties in the late 1840s meant plans were halted and construction was delayed. I would like to read you an excerpt of Tony Carter's life as a trainee clerk at Shoreham Station back in 1949-1950. This is from a book about his life on the railway called To the Railway Born, and really shows what a vibrant place Shoreham was back in the 50s. One of the clerk's tasks was to count the bridge tolls which were brought in from the old Shoreham toll bridge, where the A27 crossed the Steyning Line. Incidentally, more on that in episode 2. A large volume of change was paid into the booking office once or twice a day. The parcels office would be stacked high each day with parcels for delivery to shops with different piles for various rounds. Worthing District Growers Association market produce was sent daily from local stations to London markets. Occasionally, a truck of livestock would be attached to a parcels train or a Steyning Line service. Now, all sorts of items used to travel by train, many of which have since been lost to other forms of transport. But in the season, it was commonplace to have pigeons offered for transit. Pigeon fanciers would put their birds on training flights by sending them further and further away from home and timing their flight. Some would be sent to a station to be released. Station staff would take the basket to an overbridge, open it, release the birds, noting the time of release and returning the basket to the senders. A GPO, or General Post Office telephone, was situated there, and the public could also hand in a telegram form. Now, in case you're too young to know what a telegram is, it's like a text message, but written on paper, and you had to pay for each word. Finally, in 1859, permission was granted for the route we know today by the London and Brighton South Coast Railway. I've got a bill here from the 1st of July 1861, giving details of the first service to run on the Steyning Line. Both railways eventually merged, and in July 1846 they became the London and Brighton South Coast Railway, which was to become the badge of our Steyning Line. Now, I'm going to read you an article from a newspaper that was written in the first few days the Steyning Line opened, and it's quite interesting because of how aloof they sounded. Take a listen to this. We had the pleasure of passing up the line in one of the first trains started, and a very delightful trip it was, for the scenery is exceedingly pretty. And it is an instructive feature to see the old and new world brought, as it were, in contact for the first time. Very many in the district had never seen a train of carriages before, and the populace, as a matter of course, rushed out en masse to witness the wonder of the age. That article and quote were found in From the Day Before Yesterday by George Cockman and Joyce Slates, courtesy of Steyning Museum. Now, in 1923, it was renamed Southern Railways, and even though Network Rail owned the infrastructure, it's still known as Southern Railways today. Shoreham had one of the earliest subways of a rural station, more extensive than the one here you see today. As you can see, there were also entrances and exits onto a walkway that's now internal to the station. Now, another big difference between today and the early days of the railway is the manner in which, as a pedestrian, you would cross from one side of the railway to the other. Now, in the days of health and safety, we've got things like level crossing gates, bridges and subways, but back in the 1800s, you could simply just walk along the line. There were boards across between the platforms, and you would just look up and down the line, check for trains, using a bit of common sense and an element of jeopardy to make sure you got to the other side. Of course, things have changed nowadays, but when we look back at old photographs of the 1800s, you'll notice that on many stations there don't appear to be any footbridges. They seem to appear from the 1900s onwards. Oh, how things have changed. So, back to the history. Now, when they were talking about a railway line to run between London and the south coast, there was talk that it might run directly to Shoreham instead of directly to Brighton. But of course, the London to Brighton line did win out. But Shoreham was important. Why was that? Well, it's a harbour, which meant it received goods from around the country and around the world, including coal, which was essential for steam railways. Accordingly, the Shoreham to Brighton line was given priority, and that was actually finished first before the London to Brighton line. The coastal line between Shoreham and Brighton opened in 1840, and the Brighton to London line opened in 1841. And at that point, it was the most direct route from London to Paris, because then ferries went from Shoreham. But the railway operators and the harbour commissioners couldn't decide and agree whether to build a port at Shoreham. And in the end, they opted for Newhaven, where ferries continue to run from to this day. The coastal line was then extended to Worthing in 1845, to Chichester in 1846, and onward to Portsmouth in 1847. The single line from Shoreham to Steyning and up into Horsham opened in 1861, and that is our Steyning Line as we know it. You're all rather confused by those dates. I know I certainly am. Let's take a look at a timeline to make it a little clearer. Let's start then on the 11th of March 1840, when Shoreham Station was opened. The same year, on the 12th of May, the Brighton to Shoreham branch line opened, and the following year, the 21st of September 1841, the Brighton to London main line also opened up. In 1845, the original Shoreham Station building was demolished, at the same time as the line was extended, and Brighton to Chichester Railway opened its line between Shoreham and Worthing. We're going to be adding to the timeline as the series continues, so you can see how it all fits together. Now, level crossing gates. In its time, Shoreham has had them all. In the very early days, there was absolutely nothing here at all. Then, they were replaced with the manual gates that had to be pushed open and pushed closed. Then that progressed to gates that were operated from the signal box by turning a large mechanical wheel. And finally, in the 1980s, they were replaced with these, the electric lifting gates, which you're more familiar with today. I'm now going to show you a video of the gates opened by the wheel from the signal box that used to be right behind me. So how many of you remember that? Now just imagine what it would be like if steam trains were still running through Shoreham today. Shoreham, the level crossing gates are currently down. Now, prior to the 1980s, that operation would have been controlled right here. This is the site of the old Shoreham B signal box. The connections are still there now in these junction boxes, but it's all controlled from Lancing. But in the early days of the railway, the signal box actually sat here, giving the operator a good view of both the railway line and the road. Now I'm standing right near the site of the old Shoreham signal box, which would have just been there. And I'm delighted that I'm with Brian Whipp, who actually used to work there. Hi, Brian.
Hello, Stephen.
So the box was just there then, and you worked here for a number of years?
I did, yeah, indeed. But it's changed a lot now, of course. It's all automatically operated. When I was there, we had a lovely big wheel to turn and open the gates for the public.
Fantastic. So you worked how many years did you work in the Shoreham signal box for?
I was there for 6 years.
6 years.
Yeah.
And this was Shoreham B, wasn't it? So this operated the line from here going in this direction?
Yes, it was the junction for the Horsham line, but when I was there, it went as far as Beeding Cement Works.
So you operated the single line that ran up to there.
Yeah.
When did you actually start working for the railways then?
Oh, 1956 as a 15-year-old boy in Brighton.
And do you remember the Steyning Line when it was fully open in
yes,
the 60s?
I do remember. I travelled on it actually for a time. I was a relief signal lad at Brighton and travelled all the way to Horsham, to the signal box there, to do some recording for the signalman.
Fantastic. Now seeing this train go here, these level crossing gates then are now operated from Brighton, aren't they?
No, operated from Lancing.
Operated from Lancing.
Lancing signal box is the next one down. It controls 10 level crossings through CCTV. There's the camera up there that watches over everything, but not in my day.
So what was it like winding that big wheel then? Was it quite difficult?
No, once you got your weight behind it, it was fine. Kept you fit. There's no problem. It was the levers that were hardest to pull.
So Lancing signal box looks after a huge section of line, and
Yes.
they have eyes on it, where you would have just looked out the window. They're now relying on things like this, the cameras.
That's right, and the signal box at Lancing controls 10 level crossings along this line.
That's a lot, isn't it?
It is a lot of responsibility.
Now, we are right by the subway here at Shoreham Station. You can only really go from there to there, but it used to be different, didn't it?
Yes, it had a subway that you could go access from the street level underneath. It had full public access, except on Christmas Eve.
What happened on Christmas Eve?
Well, because of the regulations of the railway at the time, they had to close it once a year.
Okay.
So there was no right of way established. So that was the signalman's job after the last train on Christmas Eve to lock the gates to the subway from the public.
And open it again on Boxing Day.
And open it again on Boxing Day, first person on duty.
So
yeah.
quite a few years then since you trod on the platforms at Shoreham. How's it changed over the years? Looking around, is there much difference?
It's changed quite a lot. In fact, over there, as you look on the right there, that door was the station master's office. And he controlled this station and Southwick Station,
Okay.
I seem to remember. But in the booking office, we had Tony, when I was there, Tony, the booking office clerk. He done all the administration, looked after the wages for us. We'll come up once a week with a little pay packet for our wages, you know.
If it's not a cheeky question, Brian, what did you start earning when you started on the railways?
As a 15-year-old, £2.70 to 6 as a junior.
£2 a week.
Yeah.
My goodness,
And that
huge
was-
amount of money.
And that was one of the reasons why I came onto the railway, was for a decent wage compared with what was being paid in those days.
Wow.
In those days, you were classified on the physical work that you did.
Right.
And because it was such a busy signal box, because of the amount of trains and the branch line, it was a high-grade job.
You got paid by the number of times you opened the gates.
Basically through the day.
God,
yeah.
that's not bad, is it? And how many staff used to work here?
Quite a lot of staff, station staff, regular staff on this side, the upside to London, on the downside.
Yeah.
Regular staff here would have a fingerboard for the announcements. There was no loudspeaker system. You would have a fingerboard, and they would put for every train where it was going to.
Oh, crikey.
Yeah.
And of course it was the steam days as well. What do
Yeah.
you remember about steam trains?
What do I remember? My first recollection of a steam train was being a youngster taking numbers on Brighton platform.
Wow.
But enthusiasm for that soon waned. But I didn't see the last locomotive from Brighton Works come out of the Brighton Works in 1957.
Right.
It was the last engine that
The
came
last
out
one.
of Brighton Works, yeah. Standard tank, they called it.
Do you miss those days?
Not really, no. I enjoyed working through the railway career. I did 43 years, and I don't regret 1 minute of it. Marvellous people to work with. It was a secure job, you see. That was the main. It was low paid. Most of the jobs in the manual grades were low paid, but it was the overtime that you got, you see, working weekends.
And it was a job with a bit of security.
Well, when I worked in that signal box, we worked 3 staff, 24 hours, and when it came to Sunday working, we used to get 1 Sunday off in 3. Other than that, you worked every Sunday, every Saturday.
Right.
And with an occasional day off, if you got it in the week.
Nice. Was it nice and warm?
Oh, it was cosy.
And a good view as well. You could see up and down the road and along the railway line.
Yes, it was. We used to get a few bad calls from the public if we kept the gates, shut for too long.
Have you got the gates shut for too long?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they could look up at you and say a few things. But
you could wave down.
It was all done friendly.
Yeah, good stuff. Oh, Brian, well, thank you very much for sharing your memories. And we'll now wait for the next train, which is another 15 minutes. Now, behind me you can see lots of advertising boards. Whenever you look at old photographs or old films of railway stations, there always seem to be plenty of signs advertising products and services back in the day. We're going to be sending our transport historian Mike to find out more about adverts and printing later in the series. We've been talking a fair amount about the old signal box that used to be situated right behind me over there. But what was life in a signal box actually like? We've sent Mike to find out more.
So, while Stephen's been looking for relics of the Shoreham to Steyning Line down in Shoreham, I've journeyed a little further afield to look for a relic from the Victorian era. I've come to Amberley Museum near Arundel in West Sussex to find out a little bit more about a rather special building. In the 1840s, the blossoming railway network spread through the country like wildfire, with multiple companies springing up to take advantage of this new revolutionary industrial marvel. With newer, refined engines carrying passengers faster than ever before, safety became critical. At a vast station or a massive goods yard, you start to realise just what a mammoth task controlling the train network really is. So enter the signalman. The signal box itself is a very familiar trackside sight, usually seen from the windows of your comfortable train as it whizzes past. In the early days of the railway, the signal controls were open to the elements, with a single-person shelter located close by, much like a sentry box outside a royal palace. This provided basic shelter from the elements, with some boxes able to be turned to face away from inclement weather. But I can't help thinking that life as an early signalman would have still been pretty miserable. So these wooden towers that sprung up trackside offered an elevated view for the signalman and came with all sorts of comforts such as a stove for heating, a roof to protect you from the rain, and sometimes even a cat. Signal and control box design varied wildly between the different operating companies. However, one of the most dominant signalling and equipment manufacturers was Saxby and Farmer. One of the first signal boxes designed and built by John Saxby was at Lovers Walk, just north of Brighton. Moving inside from a sentry box to a warm, covered control room like this one must have felt like a luxury to a Victorian signalman. But what was life really like? Trains thundering by, 9 bells dinning in the signal box, one against another, a score of telegraph indicators before his eyes, 3 telephones behind him, and under his sure and powerful hands, a row of levers, the keys of life and death. The novelist James Snowdon Keithley wrote that about a signal operator for Pall Mall magazine in 1907. The job was very high pressure. One mistake, just one wrong pull of one of the levers, could affect literally thousands of passengers, or even worse, bring about bad publicity for the railway operating company. It was also one of the loneliest jobs on the railway network. It was fine if you worked on a signal box close to a busy station. You could chat to the commuters and fellow colleagues on your way to work. But if you were stationed in one of the more rural or countrified areas, then you could see nobody, pretty much for the entire day. Your only faces that you would see would be those of the passengers as they whizzed past the window. The only sound you would hear, the only contact, would be maybe a bell code from the signalman down the line. To a lonely signalman, his workplace was an extension of his home, and bored signalmen kept themselves occupied by painting, cleaning, and some even took to gardening, with floral displays around the grounds surrounding the box and also window boxes. Some railway companies even held competitions to see who had the best floral display. It's often said that if you took over a box unmarried, then you never would marry. So, how do you take over a box? Well, at age 14 you would leave school and be subject to a strict eye test. You'd then be assigned to a permanent signalman and learn the ropes until declared proficient. From there, you were assigned to a smaller or less important box, perhaps on a branch line, with career progression being to gradually step through bigger and more important signal boxes until finally you worked at one of the busiest boxes on the main line. The salary for a Victorian signalman was between 12 and 30 shillings a week. So calculating for inflation, in 2024 that's around about £69 a week in modern money. Your working week would be 13 days on and 1 day off to transition from night shift back to the day shift. You'd be working a total of around 84 hours a week, and if you got a week off, then the railway company would be certain to stop your pay. Times have changed, and with centralisation and modernisation, a lot of the signal boxes have fallen into disrepair or just been abandoned. There are times, however, when a signal box has such an historic relevance, it can't just be pulled down. This is one such box. Tucked away at the top end of Amberley Museum is the old Billingshurst signal box. This was built sometime around 1868 by the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway at the end of the Billingshurst Station platform. It's a building with a significant historical relevance, being an original Saxby and Farmer design, very similar to the box built at Lovers Walk in Brighton a few years previously. In its heyday, it controlled 19 sets of signals or points, but by the 1980s it had almost fallen out of use. By 2014, however, a redesign of the station meant that this one-time Grade 2 listed building needed to be removed by Network Rail, and so it was very kindly donated to the museum. Volunteers at the site rebuilt and restored it, and it adds a wonderful, nostalgic feel to the narrow gauge railway running past. So Bob, this is Billingshurst signal box, which I understand you were very familiar with.
Yeah, about in 1962 when I had to pull the signalman's job at Steyning.
Right.
They couldn't hold me there, so they had to send me to another box, and Billingshurst was the closest I could go to.
Oh right,
Because
excellent.
it's open all the time. Steyning wasn't. Steyning was only open for about a couple of hours in the morning and a couple of hours in the evening.
Right, okay.
I had to have 8 hours a day training
So effectively you trained in this box.
to get my certificate to go to Steyning to pass out there.
Right. So you've not seen the signal box in 60 years, is it? Would that be fair to
Something like
say?
that. Something like that.
Well, let's go and have a look.
Okay. The stairs weren't like this when it was at Billingshurst, was it? You walked off the bridge and straight in the door.
That was it, straight in the door.
Yeah, it's totally different.
So, here we go.
It's a bit different. Oh, it's still got the
So
lock.
here we are.
Yeah.
How does it look? Does it look familiar to you, Bob?
No. Totally different.
Changed a lot, has it?
Yeah, it really has.
So I realise I may be pulling the memory banks a little bit, Bob.
Yeah.
But can you talk us through roughly what all this does?
Right.
In layman's terms, imagine I'm a trainee signalman. What have we got in front of us
Right.
here?
The first thing you've got to learn is the different colours of the signals. The levers. The red ones are signals, are stop signals. The yellow ones are distance signals, and they're furthest out. White ones are levers that are no longer required. And
Right.
then you've got a black one, which is a pair of points that
Like that
takes you from one line to another, which is like number 15,
Okay.
which is number 15 lever.
Number 15 lever.
Yeah. The
Right,
brown
okay.
one is what used to be for the old level crossing, where you're standing used to be a wheel,
So, have you got any memorable stories from your times on the railway?
Well, to start with, to be me as a Porter Signalman, you have to go to training school, which was at Clapham Junction in those days, and it's like a 12-week course. You go up for a fortnight of learning all the rules and regulations. At the end of it, you have to have an exam. And then you go to a signal box for 8 weeks, and then you have practical training. But after that, I then went back to my box at Steyning to learn that properly, because it was only open for 3 hours in the morning and a couple of hours in the evening.
Right, okay.
Then I went back to training school again to do my final exam. After that, the signalling inspector come out and watch you operate. And to do that, the box was open for nearly 8 hours, and I had to tell him everything I knew when I passed out the exam, and that I could competent work the box.
So one question, I'm going to throw this at you, and you've just picked me up on this previously. I referred to this as a tea towel. So every signal box that I've seen has
a duster.
A duster?
Yes, for putting the levers.
Okay, why?
Because you've got sweaty hands,
yes,
levers, and you'll see there's little rust marks on there.
Oh, right, okay.
So when you pull them, you put one hand on the top and one here and pull.
Right, okay.
And that's every signalman had one of them.
Every signalman had a what was it? A duster. Duster.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Because
Not a tea towel.
No. When we was a box, when I was a signal lad, that was one of the jobs you did, was clean all the levers. Okay.
Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming down and seeing us. Right, I will hand back to Stephen, who I understand is in Shoreham looking for more interesting things.
Now, we're very lucky here on Tracing the Rails that we've been granted permission to film in places that we would otherwise never have access to, such as on land owned here by Oakley Developments. And I'm here to meet Glenn. Morning, Glenn.
Lovely. Morning.
Hi there. Thanks very much for letting us come along. So this parcel of land is the very southern tip of the old Steyning Line.
Wonderful.
Can we go and take a look?
Sure, yeah, come on in.
Wonderful.
Let's see what we can find.
Now, this rather desolate looking parcel of land has been many things over the years. Would you believe it? 100 years ago, there was actually a house here. It's also been a car dealership, and Oakley Developments have bought the land, and it's going to be developed in the future. So this is a little glimpse into the past of something that's going to be built. But crucially, this is where the very southern tip of the Steyning Line ran, and it joined the main line just a few hundred metres up here. I'm going to take a look and see if there are any signs of that original track surviving. Right here beneath my feet, this is where the journey begins. This is the point where the Steyning Line joined the existing railway line. As you can see behind me, it's still an operational line. And can you just imagine the driver's viewpoint here, where the line would have headed off north up towards Bramber? Now, my dad, Barry, learnt to drive in 1960, and he bought a series of Ordnance Survey maps, including this one, which is a 1957 edition. And you can see on the map where the Steyning Line actually diverges off. So a few metres behind me, that's where the Steyning Line would have joined the current railway. I'm going to see if there are any surviving traces left behind.
Been inside it when they were lifting it. Now this is the little line that went up to, what was it, Horsham? Yeah.
I'm actually as close to railway property as I can be now without trespassing, and amazingly behind me there are still some original rails from the Steyning Line. Now, the main railway shut in 1966, but crucially a branch line continued to run up to the cement works until the early 1980s, and these are those 1980s rails. They were removed, but crucially were never collected, and they've been left at the side of the railway for over 4 decades. So if you're on a train going from Shoreham towards Lancing, look out the window and you might spot them. But if you're not in this part of the country, look on Google Earth and you can actually see these rails from the satellite images. You might also spot behind me some crates that have some chains in. These were used by the lifting equipment where the rails were removed, and again they were supposed to be collected, but they never were. Behind me is the railway bridge, and what you might notice is how it's very wide and it also splays out. This is because the double track of the Steyning Line would be running just here, just to my right, as it headed up towards Bramber. The last vestiges of history. Why is it there are always buddleia plants near railway lines? Now, I'm going to read you an extract from the West Sussex Gazette, published on July the 4th, 1861. The article was called "The Day the Railway Came. The opening of the Steyning and Henfield line of railway." This line of railway, concerning which there was so much controversy in Parliament 3 years ago, opened on Monday last. Our readers will recollect that the landowners had completed a line of railway to take its course up to the district, and a smart fight took place in the committee room of the House of Commons between them and the Brighton Railway Company, which ended in the passage of the bill authorising this line and throwing out the other. The line is not yet entirely completed, but it is sufficiently so to admit traffic up to Partridge Green. It is a well-constructed line, and those who are experienced in such matters speak very highly of the manner in which Mr. Furbank, the contractor, has done his work, seeing that all is in order. So well done, Mr. Furbank. You built the railway to a very high standard, but it did sound like things were kicking off at one point, back in 1861. So let's imagine now that I'm walking along the old tracks of the Steyning Line. The southern part of the line opened on the 1st of July 1861. It was a single track that only ran as far as Partridge Green. The northern part of the line opened in subsequent years, and then ultimately it was converted into a double track. That whole line shut in 1966, and then ironically the double track at this end became a single track once again, as they kept a single line open as far as Upper Beeding to serve the cement works. I'm going to read you an extract from the London Gazette. Notice is hereby given that the application is intended to be made to Parliament. First, a railway commencing in the parish of New Shoreham in the county of Sussex by a junction with the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway at or near the Shoreham Station thereon, and terminating in the parish of Henfield in the said county of Sussex at or near a place called West End, from which said intended railway will pass from New Shoreham, Old Shoreham, Coombs, Botolphs, Bramber, Beeding, Steyning, Ashurst and Henfield, all in the said county. So yes, some places that the railway never actually ended up stopping in. This is their original proposal for it. All the necessary powers of the purchase of lands and buildings, either by compulsion or agreement for the purposes of the said intended railways and works. So essentially they were going to do this railway come what may. If you didn't agree to selling your land, they were going to take it anyway. And notice is hereby also given that copies of the intended act will be deposited in the private bill office of the House of Commons on or before the 31st day of December next. And this is dated the 10th of November 1857. As I walk along the path of the actual tracks of the Steyning Line, could this be a remnant of the old railway days? Some kind of metal retaining wall that's being used to hold the embankment at bay to stop things perhaps falling onto the track. It's certainly in the right colour green for the old Southern Railway. We can't be certain, of course. There were two signal boxes at Shoreham, A and B. Shoreham A controlled the line out towards Brighton, and B controlled the line out towards Worthing, but also the Steyning Line. It operated things like the level crossing gates and all the points. Now this version of the schematic from 1979, showing the line from Portslade to Lancing, and also the single track goods line that was all that was left of the Steyning Line, sold at auction in 2023 for £320. Well, this is about as far as I can make it. Just there is one of the original brick pillars or piers that was part of the bridge that took the line over the road where it curved up towards Bramber. The original brick piers are a real testimony to the engineering and the brickwork of the 1860s, the fact that it survives to this day. And I'm standing right on top of one of those piers. And this is it. This is the last surviving bit of bricks and mortar evidence of the old Steyning Line here in Shoreham. Soon to be demolished as well, which is rather sad in a way. Now this is quite a busy road. Hundreds, if not thousands of cars go up and down it each day. And I bet very few of them actually remember the fact that this was a bridge or the significance of this old wall. If you want to know what the original bridge looked like, you don't have to go too far to find out, because this railway bridge is an identical design to the one that took the Steyning Line up towards Bramber. There's a train right above me now, actually, very, very noisy. Now you might think they were built to a very high technical and complex standard, but in actual fact they are quite crude. It's a metal structure with planks sitting on steels, and the railway is just sitting on that. So as I look up, I can see daylight between the planks and the trains running above me. But give it its due, it's lasted all those years. The land to the west of the road is much lower than it is the other side, so to combat this height difference, they built this beautiful brick viaduct for the main line. If you want to imagine what it would have looked like to see a steam train thundering over, we can actually show you with this magnificent video clip. Now that footage wasn't taken that many years ago, and it just highlights how quickly some of the last remaining traces are disappearing. Now bridges like this aren't especially photogenic, and we have struggled to find many photographs of the other bridge as it would have been before the early 1980s. But thanks to Facebook groups and contributors like Lawrence Tebbs and Peter Beadle, we found a photograph taken just where the camera is today of a marching band that came down here in 1979. And here, this is where the western pier of the bridge would have been prior to it being demolished in the 1980s. These wonderful images captured by Anders show the bridge from the top, still with the disconnected tracks on it. Again, you can see the simple wooden board surface, the same as the one we stood underneath. Unlike the mainline bridge, it crossed the road at quite an oblique angle. If you want to know what it looked like, I'd like to thank Chris Bedford, known affectionately as Dumpman, who took some images of this bridge right above me before it was knocked down.
Sorry, this is a bit rough on the footage side, but it's very difficult cycling. Towering embankment, still got the ballast in place, and it's at this point that I shall get off and walk, because the danger is I'll fly over the edge and into the road. This is as far as you can get on the old Guildford line. Oh, there's another crabapple tree. All the ballast is still in place, and what we had here was a bridge. And you cross this bridge, as you can see, and then joined up with the main line over there. So this is the missing bridge where trains would have joined onto the Brighton line. So we're looking sort of west, really. No, we're not, we're looking east, southeast.
We'll be speaking to Chris later in the series. Now behind me, where the garages are, you can see the raised up land which took the railway line up towards the river. My explorations today really do show how transient the landscape can be. That footage we just watched by Chris Bedford, or Dumpman, shows that even something that was here seemingly recently in the 1980s can disappear before we know it. The land here, owned by Oakley Developments, is shortly to be developed, and they've given us a glimpse of how this bit of land is going to look in a few years' time. So even by the time you watch this little bit of land may well have disappeared. Here at Tracing the Rails, it's our mission to preserve the memory of the old railway line. And even though the tracks have disappeared, we'd like to continue that journey in our collective memories. So if you're looking for clues of the old railway line, they're not always that apparent from the ground, but the clues are there. What clues, I hear you ask? Well, to see them, we need to take to the air. So here we go then. This is my opportunity to take a look at the Steyning Line from above. Up we go then, Alex. So from this vantage point, I can see down here the old track bed is clearly visible. The gardens and the fence lines are like a scar through the landscape. I don't understand many of these dials, but I'm hoping there's enough fuel. So below me now is the section of land that's about to be redeveloped. You can see the wider bridge, and also the old rails we mentioned earlier on the ground are visible from here. And as we make our way to the north, you can certainly see the gardens and the fence lines and this giveaway curve of the embankment, which is now covered in an overgrown wilderness of plants where the trains used to run. Well, it's certainly been an amazing vantage point to be able to look down on the route of the old Steyning Line, something you would never ever get the impression of from ground, road level or ground level. You can see where the scar of the old railway line remains, cut into the ground. Well, thank you, Alex. That was amazing. And of course, if you don't have a helicopter of your own, why not look at Google Earth? You can get an idea of the railway from above, from the satellite images. But that was wonderful, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Stephen.
Now, of course, you don't have to have a helicopter to look for clues. There are legacies of the old railway all over the place. Look for road names, such as this one. The station may have gone, but the road name continues. And here's another one. Before we move on then, let's just take a little moment to reflect on the fact that I'm standing at the beginning and the end of the old Steyning Line. I wonder what those people who met in the pub in the 1800s to discuss the railway would make of the fact that it has now disappeared. Oh well, that's how times change. Well, that is the Littlehampton service. That's going to go through Worthing, where I live. Now, on Tracing the Rails, I'm going to do my very best to walk the entire length of the old Steyning Line. And ironically, the first little bit I can't achieve. It's that little parcel of land we've just seen. And the video we showed from Chris, or Dumpman, is probably the last time anyone would have ever been able to get there, because shortly after, that was all sealed off. I'm walking west now towards the River Ada, and I'm going to head north and rejoin the line. But before I do that, there's a few things I'd like to show you. I'm standing right on the banks of the River Ada, and long before the railway line was here in the 1800s, this was a key trade route between Shoreham and Steyning. Up where the salt marshes are in Steyning, that's where the goods were loaded and unloaded that have been brought up by boat from here in Shoreham. Over there is Shoreham Airport. That's where we caught our helicopter with Alex a little earlier on. And did you know there used to be a railway station there, initially called Shoreham Halt? It was later renamed Bungalow Town Halt before finally having the name Shoreham Airport. Now, Bungalow Town is quite interesting. It used to extend from the airport all the way down to the beach, and there's an interesting railway connection which I shall explain. Now, the reason Bungalow Town has a railway connection is that in the early 1900s, the London and Brighton South Coast Railway Company sold disused coaches that were no longer needed in service for the princely sum of £10. You could buy one of these. It would be brought from the Lancing Carriage Works over there along to Shoreham by train. Then 4 to 5 cart horses would drag that coach down over the river onto Shoreham Beach, where it would be set up as your home. So you could actually end up living inside an old railway coach. These were known as bungalows, hence the name Bungalow Town. Not all the bungalows in Bungalow Town were railway carriages, but a good percentage of them were. Now, the land the other side of the river, currently occupied by Shoreham Airport, had a very important part to play during the 2 World Wars. It was a muster point for thousands and thousands of troops who came down the line from the Steyning direction and assembled here along with munitions so that they could be taken from Shoreham along the line to Newhaven Port, where they could be ferried over to France to play their part in the war effort. Now, the Steyning Line played a particularly important role during World War II. Firstly, it provided access to Martin Lodge in Henfield, which was used by the Canadian Mounted Police. Also, the 1st Canadian Infantry Division had a huge encampment here on the airport and also on the playing fields of Lancing College just over there. Now, crucially, this was a huge encampment and access to and from it was made via the railway line. I'm actually now on the banks of the River Ada, and this is actually quite an important part of the story of the beginning of the Steyning Line. Now, when we look back in the history books about when and where and how the Steyning Line was created, there is a little bit of variation in those records. What we do know for certain, though, is that an agreement was signed at the White Horse Hotel in Steyning. Now, the river had a bit of a problem for the railway line because originally the plan was that the line would run on the west side of the river, over there, going up past Lancing College. But in the end, it was deemed too expensive, and in the end, it ended up running on the eastern side, which we're more familiar with today. Now, at what point do we decide that the railway was created? Was it the discussion? Was it the signing of the document? Was it the financing? Or was it actually work taking place in the ground? Well, I'll let you decide for yourself. What I'm going to show you, though, is the first bit of visual evidence that there ever was a railway line here at the side of the river. Now, I've been called a silly old buffer in my time, and here is actually a set of old buffers from the Steyning Line. And this is important for a couple of reasons. First of all, we're pretty sure that this is the site of one of the ends of a siding on the original Steyning Line. Now, the reason I'm saying it with a little bit of caution is that some of the railway things that we'll see on this route have been moved but kept as a kind of little trophy or sort of graveyard of the old railway, so it might be slightly out of place. But what is also significant is the railway in its current form. The Downslink is a footpath, cycleway and bridleway which follows the path of the old Steyning Line. From here onwards, you are pretty certain that you will be walking or cycling the path of the line, just with a couple of exceptions. The railway, by the way, used to cross the river in 3 places. The Downslink doesn't do that, it has a slight detour, but from here on, you know you're on the path of the track. And speaking of the track, there is actually a little bit visible here underneath all the ivy and the brambles. Oddly, there's also a little set of axles here, too small to be from a coach or a loco, maybe from a mineral wagon or one of those little pub trolleys that you see in the old cartoons. Now, as we walk along this path, you might think there are very few visual clues that there was ever a railway line here. Obviously, big things like that set of buffers are a given, but if we look carefully, there are a few other signs. In the undergrowth down here, there are a few concrete posts sticking up. Now, if we take a look at some of these, they date back from the times of the old railway line. Down here we can see, I just bobbed down this embankment. There's a couple of posts sticking up here that you can see quite clearly, and there are signs that there was once a metal fence connected there. Those date back to the old railway, but in actual fact, another clue is this embankment itself. You might think it is just a flood defence because we've got a tidal river there and houses there, and the embankment protects one from the other. And you are quite right, because the railway was built to be elevated from the river level. It was actually a little lower than this path. It has subsequently been made a little higher. But what's interesting is they've used stones and pebbles from the beach in the construction of the track bed, which they shouldn't have done. It should really be made of railway grade aggregate, but they mixed some of the stones in to be a little bit cheeky really and save a few farthings. There is also another lovely sign down here, an old wall which dates back from the old railway days. So if we just take a quick look down this embankment, we can get a proper look at it. Let's just check that there are no ships coming. No, we're all clear. This is what I want to show you. So how do we know then that this wall relates to the railway? Well, we could use a few educated guesses. It's sited quite deliberately between the river embankment and the railway line itself, so perhaps it's here to act as a flood defence. After all, the water could erode the railway line, causing subsidence. Also, you might have had people or animals wandering along here that could stray onto the track. Again, it's a good definitive boundary which shows that you're entering onto railway land. We can only really guess, unless you manage to find some old photographs, which we have managed to do, that show that this wall was here when the railway was in full operation. Let's get a better look at the wall from a different angle. We've established then that 1981 was the year that the last bit of the Steyning Line closed, and that's also the year that the tracks were ripped up. And thanks to Anders, who sent us some photographs, we can take a look at some of the images from the days leading up to the removal of the tracks, as they were taken the same year. These lovely pictures show a track laying and training locomotive on exercise, probably surveying the tracks and being used for training as the line was empty before they removed the track later that year. Now, 1966 is the year that we all associate the last passenger service to have run on the Steyning Line, but in actual fact there was one last passenger train that ran on the single line up to the cement works on the 31st of March 1979. And thanks to Renee Marriott, who sent us this cinefilm, we can take a look at that final train. The Downslink officially opened in 1984, which was 3 years after the railway line closed. Remembering, of course, that back then, 1981, it was only a single line that ran as far as the cement works. If you do walk along the Downslink, it's now a beautiful wildlife corridor. You'll be surrounded by nature as you make your way up into the South Downs National Park. And the Downslink also connects with other walking and cycling routes, such as the South Downs Way and the North Downs Way. Now, all the official documentation says that the Downslink starts at St Martha's Hill up at Shalford near Guildford, but because we're starting here in Sussex, I'm going to deem that Shoreham is the start as we head our way north. So imagine leaving Brighton railway station, heading west towards Shoreham, but instead of carrying on and looking at the back of people's houses, you could have headed north on the Steyning Line to see all of this. To see the river at this point. People boating and having fun. The sun glistening on the river. Lancing College and its chapel standing imposingly on the hill. Small, cosy cottages, mainly heated by wood or coal, with smoke curling up from their chimneys. The smell of the fresh country air mixed with the steam from the train. The silhouette of the green South Downs stretching off into the distance. The rhythmic sound of the train's wheels blending with the natural sounds of the countryside. The changing seasons from the lush green of spring to the golden hues of autumn and eventually the thick snow-covered fields and the warmth of your railway carriage. The occasional horse rider galloping alongside or pausing to watch the train, pulling on its reins at the loud bellowing noise of the steam engine. Cows and sheep grazing peacefully in the fields. The patchwork quilt of farmland, divided by ancient hedgerows and stone walls. The vibrant colours of wildflowers, especially primroses, all along the trackside, and more wildflowers dotting the landscape. We're now approaching, astonishingly already, the end of episode 1, but there's one final thing that I would like to show you. Buried in the grass, just before the toll bridge, we have some railway lines. Let's take a look. So buried here in the turf near the path are two last little pieces of track. It's a double track, but one thing to point out is that the railway line was actually there and not here. These have been re-sited, just as a little reminder, if you like, that there once used to be a railway line along this path. But it does go to show, doesn't it, that these two are disappearing. This little bit of track used to extend a little further to the north over a footpath where the rails were concreted in and used to just walk over them to get to the toll bridge. The path was recently rebuilt and they chopped off a bit of the track and that's been removed. And these last pieces are all being buried under the grass, so you never know, in a few years even these may disappear from sight.
Winding through the heart of Sussex, where history unveils, exploring whispers, tales of steel, echoes of the past, tracing the rails, tracing the rails, exploring paths where trains once roamed. Our first part, the Steyning Line, essence of adventure, the spirit of the quest, discovering the track where our heritage rests. Stories to tell you where the rails once expand. In the shadows of forgotten tracks, we're tracing the rails, tracing the rails.
Next time on Tracing the Rails, we'll start episode 2 here at Shoreham Toll Bridge. We'll head north up the line towards the cement works at Upper Beeding. We'll then look at a rather unusual house and St Botolph's Church before making our way to Bramber Railway Station. Then onward to the Steyning Bypass. So we'll see you on part 2, but in the meantime, why not check out our mini episode Sidings, available on our YouTube channel.